Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung. Look around. Everyone's pretending. Pretending they're happy. Pretending they've moved on. Pretending they're strong, but no one can hold the act forever. The mask always slips. In the silence, the hesitation, the nervous smile that doesn't match the words. And once you learn how to read it, you'll never look at people the same way again. Why do some people feel so fake, even when they're being nice? Why do others act overly confident but still seem fragile underneath? Why do you sense that something's off but can't quite explain why? The answer is this: most people don't live as who they are. They live as who they needed to be to survive. And if you want to understand others, really understand them, you need to stop listening to what they say and start noticing what they show. 1. Everyone wears a mask. Not to deceive you, to protect themselves. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social mask we wear to navigate the world. From early childhood, we learn which traits get approval and which ones get us punished. So we adapt. We smile when we're uncomfortable. We stay silent when we want to scream. We act like we don't care, just to avoid feeling rejected. But the problem isn't the mask. The problem is when we forget it's a mask at all. When someone becomes the role they play, they lose touch with who they really are. So the next time you meet someone who seems too nice, too composed, or too together, don't assume it's all real. Ask yourself, what part of themselves did they have to hide just to be accepted? 2. What you judge in others is what you've buried in yourself. Ever notice how some people can't stand loud, confident people? Or how others obsessively call out dishonesty, pride, or weakness in everyone around them? Jung called this projection when your unconscious pushes parts of yourself you can't accept onto someone else. You don't just hate arrogance because it's unpleasant. You hate it because it mirrors your own repressed desire to be seen. You don't just roll your eyes at emotional people. You do it because you were never allowed to express your own. Every harsh judgment you make is a flashlight, not on them, but on you. The parts of others you can't stand usually point straight to the parts of yourself you're still at war with. 3. The unconscious speaks when the mouth stays quiet. Words lie. The unconscious doesn't. It speaks through hesitation, nervous laughter, posture, tone, and especially silence. Someone who avoids eye contact while saying, "I'm fine," is telling you the truth, just not with their mouth. Jung believed the unconscious leaks through what he called slips, shadow reactions, and bodily cues. And most of us aren't even aware we're doing it. That's why you feel something off when someone avoids a subject, changes the topic too quickly, or gives you a rehearsed answer to a deep question. To truly read someone, you don't need to interrupt them. You need to observe the silence between their words. 4. People who obsess over morality are often hiding something. The louder someone screams about being a good person, the more likely they're avoiding a truth inside themselves. Jung warned about inflation, when someone over-identifies with the persona and begins to believe that this polished image is all they are. Have you ever met someone who constantly corrects others, always preaches about ethics, or publicly shames wrongdoers? On the surface, it might seem noble. But underneath, there's often a suppressed part of themselves they're trying to drown out. An insecurity, a mistake, a desire they're ashamed of. True integrity doesn't demand applause. It's quiet, consistent, and never performative. 5. The first person people lie to is themselves. When someone tells you, "I'm over it," or "it doesn't matter," or "I'm totally fine," don't assume they're lying to manipulate you. Assume they've been telling themselves that story for so long. They don't know it's fiction anymore. Jung believed that self-deception was a necessary defense for the ego. The mind protects itself by rewriting the past, denying pain, or constructing false identities, not because people are evil, but because the truth is often too painful to face directly. So when someone's story doesn't add up, don't call them fake. Understand that their mask might be their last line of emotional defense. 6. Where someone feels superior, they secretly feel inferior. This is one of Jung's most piercing insights. The person who constantly brags, boasts, or tries to dominate a room isn't confident. They're compensating. He called this a superiority complex, which ironically reveals a deep inferiority underneath. It's why the person who has it all keeps reminding you of it. Why the alpha needs everyone to know they're in control. It's not strength, it's fear. Real confidence doesn't perform, it just exists. So when someone needs to be louder, bigger, smarter, or tougher than everyone else, look closer. You'll often find a deeply insecure part of them begging not to be seen. You're starting to feel it, aren't you? That quiet shift in how you see people. That unsettling realization that most of what we call personality is really just protection. And now you're beginning to notice it in your boss's tone, your friend's laughter, the stranger's eyes that linger too long. This isn't magic. It's Jung's mirror, a way of seeing not just the behavior, but the wound behind it. But we're only just beginning. Because in part 2, we go deeper into the fears that drive our choices, the chaos people try to hide, and how exaggerated behavior reveals the truth the conscious mind is too afraid to say out loud. If this content makes sense to you, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you. You're beginning to feel it. The shift. You walk into a room and suddenly, the small things feel louder. A friend over-explains something meaningless. A coworker laughs a little too hard at something not that funny. Someone says, "I don't care," but their voice trembles. It's no longer invisible to you. You're not just hearing what people say, you're starting to notice what they don't. And that's where the truth lives. Carl Jung believed that what we call personality is often just adaptation, strategies built to survive, not to thrive. If part 1 showed you the mask, part 2 reveals the fear behind it. Because most people don't act from their identity. They act from their wounds. And once you start to see that, people become less confusing and far more human. 7. Most actions are driven by unconscious fear. Why do people please others even when it makes them miserable? Why do some disappear when things get serious? Why do you find yourself saying yes when you mean no, or explaining yourself to someone who doesn't even care? Jung believed these weren't choices, they were reflexes, patterns rooted in fear, playing out without our awareness. Fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough, fear of humiliation. These fears usually form in childhood, when you had no control, so your mind created habits to protect you, habits that became your personality. That person who dominates every conversation, they were probably silenced too often growing up. The friend who overworks, maybe they learned that rest makes them feel worthless. The one who never says how they feel, it's likely no one ever listened when they tried. Reading people starts with asking one simple question: what are they afraid of feeling again? Because most actions aren't about moving forward, they're about avoiding what hurt the most. 8. Constant criticism is projection with sharper teeth. There's a kind of person who can't help but judge everything. The kind who walks into a room and scans for flaws, always pointing out what's wrong, always mocking, shaming, or just being honest. But here's what Jung saw beneath the surface. The harshest critics are often at war with themselves. Projection is what happens when someone disowns part of who they are and sees it everywhere else. The man who mocks sensitivity, he probably had to bury his own emotions to survive. The woman who attacks others for attention-seeking, she likely never felt seen growing up. People don't just criticize randomly, they criticize what reminds them of their own repressed traits. And the more vicious the attack, the more personal it usually is. Criticism becomes a form of confession, not about you, but about them. If someone lashes out at your confidence, they're exposing their insecurity. If they belittle your dreams, they're mourning their own.
Reading someone means looking past their words and asking, what truth are they trying to escape?
9. Overconfidence often hides unresolved guilt. We all know the type, the person who never doubts themselves. Always right, always composed, always above everything. But if you watch closely, you'll see the cracks. Over-preparation, passive aggressiveness when challenged, and a near inability to admit being wrong. Jung called this psychological inflation, when the ego grows beyond its true capacity, not from strength, but from fear, and often that fear is rooted in guilt. Maybe they failed someone. Maybe they were told they were never enough. Maybe they carry shame from something they can't undo, so they build a flawless persona to outrun the feeling. That always strong person, they might be collapsing inside. That leader who can't accept feedback, they might fear being exposed. That friend who acts like nothing bothers them, they might be haunted by everything that does. The truth is, real confidence isn't loud. It's quiet. It doesn't need validation. So when someone insists on being unbreakable, ask yourself, what guilt are they still carrying? 10. Exaggeration is the ego's way of drowning out doubt. You've heard it. I never get sad. I don't care what people think. I'm always winning. But Jung would tell you, the more extreme the claim, the less it's true. Because exaggeration isn't truth amplified, it's insecurity disguised. The unconscious doesn't like being exposed, so the ego compensates by going loud, going big, going absolute. It shouts, I don't care. When inside it's desperate for approval, it says, I'm always happy when it's terrified of being seen as weak. It becomes addicted to extremes, because moderation requires honesty. Jung believed every exaggeration carries the seed of its opposite. The man who claims he's invincible often feels powerless. The woman who insists she's over her past may still be living in it. The louder the performance, the deeper the doubt. So when someone seems too certain, too unbothered, too perfect, don't envy them. Look for the tension. That's where the truth speaks. 11. The need for control signals inner chaos. We all want stability, but some people take it further, needing to control the conversation, the schedule, the emotions, even you. They micromanage, interrupt, avoid change like it's a threat. But what Jung uncovered was this. Control on the outside is often a mirror of chaos on the inside. When someone's inner world is disordered, when they've never made peace with their trauma, shame, or fear, they try to fix the outside world instead. It feels safer. If they can control you, maybe they won't have to face themselves. It shows up everywhere. The parent who over-disciplines, the boss who obsesses over perfection, the partner who panics when plans change. It's not about you. It's about their unconscious trying to create structure where none exists. Jung would say that the more rigid someone is with the world, the more fragmented they are inside. So when you meet someone who needs everything just right, ask, what part of their world fell apart before they had the tools to handle it? 12. Loud performance often masks silent emptiness. Think about the person who always needs to be seen. Every photo perfect, every story dramatic, every room entered like a spotlight's already waiting. At first, it might seem like confidence, but Jung saw it for what it is, a cry for recognition, not of the persona, but of the self. The persona, Jung taught, is the social identity, the mask. But when someone disconnects from their deeper self, they over-identify with the role they're playing, and roles need audiences. That's why performance becomes louder, bolder, more exhausting, because underneath it all, there's a deep fear. If I stop performing, no one will care. No one will love who I really am. The person who performs the hardest is often the one who feels the most invisible. The life that looks the most curated is often the most disconnected. The drama is just distraction from a self that hasn't been touched in years. So don't be fooled by the flash. The brightest lights often hide the darkest silence. You're not just seeing people anymore. You're seeing the fracture points, the leaks in the mask, the moments where their unconscious spills through their eyes, their tone, their silence. This isn't manipulation. This is human. Reading people doesn't make you superior, it makes you responsible, because now, when someone lashes out, you don't just feel attacked, you see their fear. When someone performs, you don't feel envious, you feel compassion. When someone tries to control everything, you understand it's not about power, it's about survival, but we're not done yet. You've started to read the mask. You've seen the cracks, the tension in the jaw, the too loud laugh, the silence that says more than the words ever could. But here's the truth Jung wanted you to understand most. What people do isn't random. It's not accidental. It's a pattern. And behind that pattern is a story, a wound, a child who never got what they needed and learned to perform instead of feel. We think people act from beliefs, from logic, from choice. But Jung saw something deeper. He believed we act from pain, from the parts of ourselves we buried so long ago, we've forgotten they were ever real. And once you see this, once you recognize that every behavior is the survival strategy of someone who was once small, scared, and ignored, you stop judging, and you start understanding. 13. No one speaks from logic, they speak from pain. You think someone is just being cynical when they say, love isn't real. You think they're cold when they say, I don't need anyone. But behind those statements is always a memory, a heartbreak, a betrayal, a moment when their trust was shattered. Jung believed that our opinions are rarely intellectual. They're emotional reactions wrapped in rational words. A person might say, people can't be trusted, not because it's universally true, but because someone they needed once proved it wasn't. So when someone holds a rigid worldview, whether about relationships, success, identity, or meaning, don't ask what they believe. Ask what hurt them into thinking this way. Because logic is rarely the foundation. It's the defense. 14. How someone reacts to weakness reveals their true strength. It's easy to be kind to powerful people, easy to respect someone when they're on top, but Jung taught that real character shows when someone is faced with vulnerability, not just their own, but someone else's. If someone mocks weakness, it's usually because they fear their own. If they punish others for mistakes, chances are they were never allowed to make their own. If they walk away when someone breaks down, it's likely no one ever stayed when they did. Compassion is strength. Patience is strength. The ability to witness pain and not flinch, to hold space without fixing or fleeing. That's what Jung would call the sign of an integrated self. So when you want to know who someone really is, give them a moment where empathy is an option. What they choose will tell you everything. 15. When someone fears being forgotten, they chase attention. There's a hunger that lives inside certain people. You see it in how they speak louder than needed, how they dress just to be noticed, how every room becomes their stage, not because they love performance, but because silence terrifies them. Jung believed that behind attention-seeking is often a forgotten child, one who felt invisible, neglected, or abandoned. So they grow up believing that to be seen, they must be dramatic. They must entertain, impress, or provoke. But what they really want isn't applause, it's acknowledgement. So next time someone feels too much, instead of recoiling, ask who didn't see them when it mattered most. Because that's the wound they're still trying to heal, not with love but with noise.
16. The person they attack is often the person they envy.
Criticism isn't always about hate. Sometimes it's about longing. Envy, Jung taught, is a secret confession. I see something in you I wish I could access in myself, but if I can't admit that, it's easier to attack. That woman who mocks another for being confident, she might never have been allowed to shine. That man who belittles someone for being free-spirited, he might still be imprisoned by his own expectations. Envy is admiration that has been poisoned by shame.
And here's the key. When someone criticizes you, especially for something authentic, consider this: they might not hate it. They might desperately wish they had the courage to embody it too.
So when you're reading someone, look for the contradiction. What do they reject that they also secretly desire? That's where envy lives, and envy always points to a disowned dream.
17. People don't act from beliefs. They reenact their childhood.
Jung believed the past is not gone. It repeats itself, disguised as adulthood. The child who was ignored becomes the adult who never stops proving themselves. The child who was punished for emotion becomes the partner who's cold and detached. The child who had to earn love becomes the one who can't stop performing for affection. You think someone is toxic, but maybe they're just scared. You think they're emotionally unavailable, but maybe no one ever taught them how to feel safe. You think they're selfish, but maybe no one ever prioritized them before, so now they don't know how to share.
Reading someone means asking not just who are they now, but who did they have to be to survive back then? Because the script most people follow wasn't written by them, it was written for them, and they've never realized they're allowed to edit the story.
18. Their patterns are confessions, if you know how to listen. People rarely say what hurts them, but they show it. In every relationship they sabotage, in every joke that hits too hard, in every time they run when things get close. The person who ghosts when things get real. They're terrified of being seen and then abandoned. The one who flirts with everyone but connects with no one. They don't believe love and safety can exist in the same place.
Jung taught that patterns are the unconscious trying to speak. It repeats what hasn't been healed. It reenacts what it doesn't yet understand. And the more often someone repeats something painful, the more likely it's connected to something unresolved.
So don't just listen to words. Watch the cycle, the behaviors, the reactions that feel too familiar. Because that's not who they are. It's where they were wounded. And once you recognize that, you no longer take it personally. You take it as a message. And maybe the biggest realization of all, this entire journey wasn't just about reading other people. It was about seeing yourself. Because every projection you recognize in someone else is a mirror to your own. Every fear you spot in their silence echoes something you've tried to hide. Every pattern you trace in another helps you trace your own. That's the gift Jung gave us, the courage to turn our eyes inward, not to judge, but to integrate. You can't change what someone else refuses to face, but you can become the kind of person who sees clearly, feels deeply, and responds with awareness. And when you do that, when you move from performance to presence, from reaction to reflection, you stop being controlled by masks, yours or anyone else's,